With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Nun Dalid. Now we left off on Daf Nun Gimel Amid Beis in middle of the Mishnah. Before we share the few words of intro to the coming Daf, I think let's do something that's unusual. Let's begin today by learning from the Zohar a few more details about that which happened when the Kohen Gadol entered the Kodesh Kodshim. So, if whoever has a Zohar, we're going to Achrei Mois Daf Samach Zayin Amid Aleph. For people that have the Masuk Midvash, I'm up to Daf Kuf Mem Aleph all the way in the bottom of the Amid. So he writes like this: that first of all, when the Kohen Gadol, as we have been learning a little bit earlier on, right, he went a total of 5 times to the mikvah. He was Mekadesh Yadayim V'Raglayim 10 times. So when it came to the final time of the Kohen Gadol going to the mikvah and being Mekadesh Yadayim V'Raglayim prior to entering the Kodesh Kodshim for the first time, in other words, when he was going to get dressed with the big Dilovin, so he writes that there was a special kavana that he needed to have. His kavana was that now I'm going to enter into a whole different type of place that has the highest level of kedusha, meaning to the Kodesh Kodshim. Now in the Mishnah, we have been learning the details of exactly when he went through the Heichel. Did he go on the north side? Did he go on the south side? We had in the Braisa 3 different shitos. So here's what the Zohar writes, that as he's about to enter from Bein Ulam LaMizbeach into the Heichel, v'as tlas shurim sacharan lei, there were 3 rows that surrounded the Kohen Gadol. First, Kohanei Achoy, comprised of Kohanim, another row of Vilevoye, Leviim, and then Umikol Sha'arama. And Kulhu Barchan Kame, they all blessed him. Not only did they bless him verbally, but it says in the Zohar that Vizakvin Yedin Alebet Soloisa, that they would actually extend their hands on top of him. And this is what we quoted at the end of last year, the Kitra, the Dahava Zakva Beragle, that there was a golden chain that was tied to his leg, just in case he would, God forbid, pass away in the Kodesh Kodshim. That would facilitate the Kohanim's removal of his remains without anyone needing to enter the Holy of Holies. And it's interesting the way the Zohar speaks about the entry. Not al talas pesian, he would take 3 steps. But then these steps were taken when no one is allowed to follow him, as we have been learning, right? He's going by himself. So there was a first 3 steps. Then not al talas pesian acharam, then he took a third 3 steps. And then not all to last and he took for the 3rd time 3 steps. So the Pseinian, and every time he took 3 steps, Mustama, there were different kavanas, there was something else that was happening. Va'oz astim einin v'iskeshar le'elam. After he took the 9th step, the Kohen Gadol would close his eyes and he would completely bind himself with the above. Then it says, similar to the words that we had in the Mishnah, that all la'asar da'ol, he went up into the place in which he went up. Shamar kol gatve de kruvayim mezamrim, and he would hear over there the musical sound that was coming out of the wings of the kruvim. Ve'okishon gatpin piriso'on le'elo, and he's writing that the wings of the kruvim would beat one against the other as they are pointing upwards. And during the singing of the wings of the kruvim, Hava active ketoides, it was then that the Kohen Gadol would offer the ketoides. The moment he put the ketoides on top of the coals, is nishtakecha koil gat payu, then the sound of the wings were silenced. Ubelechishu is napkan, and in silence the wings would embrace each other. If the Kohen Gadol was meritus. Because then there was a tremendous joy above, and that was expressed with the complete silence of the wings of the Kruvim. Then he goes weiter, that by Hishata, at that moment, Nafik Ra'avadinohira, a certain beam of light, a certain ha'ara of the Eibishter's light, Misbasma mirechen de turi afarsa meine dachyo de la ela, that became imbued with the tremendous good scent of the supernal balsam scent, the pure balsam salt of above. And that scent of which was in the oil that came as a ha'ara from the Eibishter's Ratzon, va'azla b'chol ahu asar, it filled up the place of the Kodesh Kodshim. And oil reicha b'treinukvei de chatame, and this scent went into the two nostrils of the Kohen Gadol, and v'is yashva liba, and he understood when he smelled some sort of spiritual scent that his avodah was accepted. Kedein koilohu b'lechishu, all of the above is done in complete silence. And there was no opportunity for the Satan to open up its mouth. There was no, as we learned before, remember, Hasatan begematria 364, but the Zohar is referring to that moment of the offering of the Kodesh Kodshim. Then writes the Zohar that Pasach Kahana Pume b'tzeloisa b'ru'usa b'chedvasa v'tzalit tzeloisa. The Kohen Gadol will open up his mouth in prayer with ratzain and with joy. This is connected to the Tefilla that we learned in the Mishnah that he davened when he's walking out. Basar desayim. After the Kohen Gadol finished praying, Zakvin Kirufayu Kidalakadmin Gapayu Umizamnim. Now the Kruvim began to sing again. And here the Zohar writes, that was when he finished the Tefillah Ketzara, or this Tefillah, their wings began to move and song came out. Kedain Yoda Kohana Deruusa. Then the Kohen knows that this is a special moment. The Idan Chedvus Elochayla, and it's a moment of joy. Not only that, did he know that, but Va'ama Yodan the Iskabel Tzeloisi, the people knew that God received their prayers. So it's clear that this type of sound that came out of the Holy of Holies was heard by the people. As it says, that that even if our sins were as red as shanim, Kasheleg Yalbino, God will whiten it like snow. And he would walk backwards, and he would daven a second time. So in the Mishnah, we spoke about one tefillah. The Zohar speaks about two tefillahs. And he writes, Zakor chulaki de kahana, how fortunate is the portion of kahanim. Because through the avoid of the Kohen Gadol, he creates the highest level of joy, both above and below. And for this moment, we say, Ashrei ha'am shekachaloi, Ashrei ha'am shashem alikav, a lot more in the Zohar. Now, we left off that the Kohen Gadol offered the Ketores. The Kohen Gadol went in and he offered the Dam Hapar. We were in the Mishnah where the Kohen Gadol already went in now for the third time and he sprinkled the Dam Hasoir, right? And no, we're not up to there yet. We're in the Mishnah. We left off 2 lines before the end of the medium-sized lines. So we were up to that he brought in the Dam Hapar. Now, we also learned that since no man was allowed to be in the Heichal, in the Oil Moyed, so they prepared this Kan Hazav, they prepared this golden stand upon which the Kohen Gadol would place the Mizrak of the Dam Hapar. Now, when he went in, then he went in again and he brought the Dam Hasoir. Now, when he came back out now for this third time, and he's no longer going to be entering in the Kodesh Kodshim to do anything. He'll be entering later to remove the macht on the kaf. But when he finished the 3 Ketores and the Dam Hapar and the Dam Hasoir, now he has to begin doing an avodah in the Heichel. That's where we were up to. The challenge is, we keep on learning, the avodah has to be done with the right hand. The blood of the pod is in the kan. So the Chachamim said that there was another stand that was made to put down the Dam Hasoir. And indeed, according to the Chachamim, he would put down the Dam Hasoir, and then he would pick up the Dam Hapar. That's where we left off in the Mishnah, but Rabbi Yehuda, the Tanach Rabbi Yehuda holds that there was only one golden stand. And since there was only one golden stand, so he would first have to take the Dam Hapar to make room on the stand to put down the Dam Hasoir. That is where we have the Machlokes, the Chachamim, and Rabbi Yehuda. Just to speak out by heart the daf that we're going to have, the Gemara is going to contrast after we finish the Mishnah, the words in our Mishnah, Mishanital Aron, versus the words we learned in the Braisa that we also learned in Shkola, Mishanignaz Aron. And that's very significant. Nignas means it was a mindful act of, as we know, under the rulership of King Yoshio, that it was hidden, it was put away to be retrieved when Mashiach comes. Our Mishnah, Mishanital, sounds like someone else took it. And indeed, we're going to learn again the machlokes whether the Babylonians took our Aron Kodesh during the first Galus versus the other Tanoim who hold that we hid the Aron Kodesh. We're going to have a very interesting machlokes in our Gemara. What is the opinion of Rab Shimon bar Yochai? Two shittas, bishitas Rab Shimon bar Yochai. The Gemara is going to speak about when the Torah uses the words ad hayoim hazeh. Does it always mean mamish, that whatever is being written about is until today, or lav dafka? You can have words in scripture that write until today, but it means not until today, Tafshan Pei Aleph. It can mean until when it was written. We're going to see a Gavaldika discussion about that. We're going to have some Agadata regarding the poles of the Aron Kodesh, and we're going to learn as a shocking Chazal that we didn't have until now. We already learned a few times that during the Regalim, in order for us to see how much God loves us, the Kohanim would show us how the breads of the Lechem Apanim are still smoking hot. We learned that a few times recently. But we're going to have unique here in Yoma Daf Nun Dalid. Now we're going to have to figure out exactly when did that happen. But the Chazal tell us that Amar Rav Katina, that in Bishah She Yisrael Oilim L'Regel. Listen, Migalgin Lohem HaParoiches. They would roll up the curtains. Umarin Lohem Es HaKruvim. To allow even the Yisraelim to see the Kruvim, l'chayda we saw into the Kodesh Kachim. And why did they show us the holy Kruvim? Shahoyu ma'oidim zebazeh, how they were embracing one the other. And right away, the issue we're going to have is, guys, we have the tradition that only Bisman by Yisrishan were the Kruvim right on top. We're in the above the ground Kodesh Kachim. Well, during the first Beis Hamikdash, there was a wall that separated the Kodesh from the Kodesh Kachim, Amataraxim. There's nothing to roll up. How can you see in there? Bisman by Yesheni, there were one curtains. Rabbi Yosi, the Chachamim say there were two curtains. But even if they would roll everything up, you can't. There's nothing to see in there because there was no Aron Kodesh. We're going to have to work that out. But here we have a Gavaldik thing that there were times that we were shown inside the Kodesh Kachim. That will go back. How are we allowed to look inside? Didn't we learn right just recently? One of the reasons why the Kohen Gadol would not walk mamish on the right side, on the northern side, because it's not modest to look into the Kodesh Kachim. But here we're showing it off for everyone. We're going to deal with it. And we're going to learn a little bit about the Kruvim that were engraved on the walls inside the Kodesh Kachim. We're going to speak out the Tosfos that looks to you like little, right? The Tosfos on Daf Nun Daled Amud Aleph. If you take a turn the page, there's not that much Gemara because this is a very important Tosfos regarding are we allowed to make pictures? What exactly is prohibited? Loisase, locha, pesel, b'chol temuna. Right, this is really the sugya that we have in Avodah Zarah. Many people are familiar with the difference between a protruding image, right, versus just a painting. But we're going to be speaking about images that were engraved, they were either protruding or they were indented. How was that permitted? That's going to be a very important place. We will learn some of it. But the fact is on the panels of the walls of the Kodesh Kachim, there were the images of the Kruvim. And there also, when we were worthy, they were embracing each other. That's going to be the only way to explain this Chazal that they opened up the curtains. And we're going to learn about the Evan Shasiyah. It's going to be a very mystical daf. We're going to quote a big way machlokes tanoim exactly what's the beginning point of the creation of the world. We're going to suggest perhaps al pi Hasidus the inner meaning of that machlokes. If we'll have time, we're going to go through the Chazal that toil dois shamayim mi shamayim nivru'u, that all of the heavenly bodies were created out of the heavens, and toil dois aretz mi haaretz nivru'u, versus another Tana that holds that everything was created from the aretz and much more. Let's not be afraid, even if we will fall a little bit behind. The plan will be is that Daf Nun Hey and Daf Nun Vav, especially Daf Nun Vav, is relatively small. So whatever we're not going to finish today, Nishka Ferlach, we're going to make up over the next Daf or two. This is Mamish Moededik. So again, we left off 2 lines at the end of the second to last line of the medium-sized lines in Daf Nun Gimel Amid Beis. He left the Kodesh Kachim already for the 3rd time. Right, he now he has to begin sprinkling the dam of the pod and of the soil on the curtain. Means now he's going to continue doing the avodah inside the heichal. And again, machlokes tanoim, if there were 2 stands, kishitas chachamim, then he would first put down the dam hapar, the dam hasoir, and then he would pick up the dam hapar. because in every environment, the avodah needed to be done first with the pot and then with the soid. However, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that there was only one stand, so that's where we're going to continue. Not al dam hapor. He would have to first take the dam hapor to make room in the one and only kan, the yiniach dam hasoid. And again, just like in the kodesh kachim, ba'avodas dam, the par comes before the soid. And let's back up. Shchita, par, and then the soid. The sprinkling in kodesh kachim, par, and then the soid. Now also inside the heichal, par, and then the soid. So v'hizo mimenu, he would sprinkle from the blood of the bull, ala paroiches shekeneged ha'aden mibachutz, but he would sprinkle it exactly the way he did the avodas hadam in the holy bowl.
Wow, I don't know what happened.
And let me just do this.
No, I didn't drop.
All right. And achas l'mayla v'sheva l'matom. The Mishnah does not elaborate a etc. A v'chule is enough. Only like matzlif. We're going to review this again in the Gemara. And after he finished sprinkling the dam hapor towards the paroiches, now, guys, the widest lines, not al dam hasoid. He would now take the dam hasoid. And again, how would he take it? That will again be contingent on the machloikis between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he would have to first take the dam hasoir and then put down the dam hapor, because there's only one stand. V'niach dam hapor, exactly. This is Lashitas Rabbi Yehuda. V'hiz b'menu ala pareiches shekeneged ha'adim mibachutz, exactly the way he did the avodah with the dam hapor, which is achas l'mayla v'shav l'mata chuli. And according to our Tana, it was now that the Kohen Gadol will mix the dam hapor together with the dam hasoir. We're going to learn later that there are other opinions, that it was mixed later. It was for sure mixed at a certain point during its application on the inner Mizbeach. But our Mishnah holds that all of the applications on the Mizbeach HaPnimi was after the dam hapor was mixed with the dam hasoir. And here are the details. Ira dam hapor litoich hasoir. Mashma, you would pour it from the mizrak of the par into the mizrak of the soir. So now the original mizrak that received the dam hapor is empty. But you didn't only pour it once into the dam hasoir, but now you would pour the full cup into the empty cup. In other words, you would pour it back, which caused a better mixing. Okay, says the Gemara. Misha Nignaz, referring to the opening line in the Mishnah, like Tani. Ella Mishanital, when it was taken, Tanan, our Mishnah follows. Commander Amar, Arain Gola Lebavel, and it was taken by the Goyim. It was taken. The Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Oimer, Arain Gola Lebavel Shenemar, passing in the Divrei Hayomim, Ulis Shuvas Hashana. At the turn of the year, Sholach HaMelech L'Muchanetzer. This is after the passing of Yoshio. This is when he began already to take us into Golus. Right? It was a process of over 18 years. And Vayiviyehu, Yehoiachin was then the king. He then exiled King Yehoiachin to Bavel, but he didn't go by himself. Im klei chemdas beis Hashem, with the precious kalim. Now, what does the precious kalim refer to? Understands Rabbi Eliezer? Not only, but also the Aron Kodesh. However, according to our Tana, according to this Braisa, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, no. I'm sorry, yes, like Rabbi Eliezer, that Aron Gola Lebavel. He also holds like that. But what was his pasuk? So it says in Yeshayahu, that's about what's going to happen by Churban Bayis Rishon, that lo yivaser davar, nothing will be left over, nothing will remain, says God. So says Rashbi, Gavalik, davar is aremes to the words diber, dibres, that the dibres won't remain. Aha. Elo aseres adibres sheboy. I just want to add something. I want to go back to what we said in Shkolim. Now that I feel, anyways, we're going to fall behind. Might as well fall behind. That remember, there was a machlekes whether there was one ark and two arks, and we were teaching the Gemara in Shkolim that even according to the Shita that there were two arks, but at once we moved into the Beis Hamikdash, we moved the Kula Alma, the Shivrei Luchas and the Luchas were together, and then we gave the suggestion that maybe when you have these shitas that say that the Aron Kodesh was taken into Bavel, it was that Aron Kodesh that did not house the Luchas. So even if the goyim, God forbid, they got hold of the Aron HaKodesh, it was without the luchos. That's the way we learned that pshat. It wasn't our own. One of the achreinim learned that pshat over there. Clearly, Rashbi doesn't hold that way, because the whole rem is because it says davar, and davar means dibur. Dibur is aseres hadibris. It's very dachuk to say that it means the ark without the dibris. In other words, clearly that the dibris were taken into Bav. Oy gewalt. And now, Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish Oimer, and here we have on the side another version that this is Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Loim, says no. Aron ben Mekayma Nigmas. The Aron was concealed in its place. Another nuance. You know what ben Mekayma means? Ben Mekayma doesn't only mean in the Holy Land. Ben Mekayma is not what we learned in Shkolim, that over there in the Lishko where they had the woodshed, where they had the wood. That's not ben Mekayma. Just a mash. Ben Mekayma means pashit, that maybe there's a passageway in the Holy of Holies to go downstairs, to go somewhere in a tunnel. And it's hidden in its place. As it says, that the pasuk begins is that they extended, when they placed the Aron HaKodesh in the Kodesh Kachim, so it says, Vaya'arichu habadim, they extended the poles. Now, extending the poles, we'll learn this more in Daf Nun Daled, the poles were never allowed to be removed from the rings. But appreciate that when the Levim would carry the Aron HaKodesh, the poles, the Aron was in the center of the poles, affording each Levi equal space towards the Aron HaKodesh. When they placed it in the Kodesh Kachim, even though they were never allowed to remove the poles, but they moved it more towards the east and to the west. So they extended the poles. That's how the pasuk is. Vayerechu habadim. And then it says, to what point? Vayerou rashei habadim in hakodesh al pnei hadavir. That the extended poles became noticeable. The tips became noticeable. Even when you are on the other side of the curtain, even when you are in the kodesh, you can see the poles. It's noticeable, but it's not noticeable. You can see it, but you can't see it. V'lo yirou achutza. Now, what does it mean, vayero, but v'lo yiro? Again, the Gemara will explain. Now, what's the word of Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Loy, Rabbi Lakish, says, vayihu sham ad hayom hazeh. So since it says ad hayom hazeh, so Rabbi Yehuda is of the shita that if God writes anywhere in Tanach, until today, Torah is Chaim, Torah is a living Torah. Whenever a Yid reads it, it's emes. So if it says until today, it must mean until today. Gewaldig. And we're going to challenge that by pointing out that there are other times that we have in Tanakh the words ad hayom hazeh, and it doesn't mean until today. It means when it was written. So we're going to deal with that again in the Gemara. Now, what do we have over here? We have in this Braisa 3 shittos, whether the first two are exactly the same. It could be they're not exactly the same. It could be that Rabbi Eliezer holds that Nebuchadnezzar took it. Could be that Rashbi holds that we took it. But it wasn't in Eretz Yisrael. Then you have the third opinion that it was hidden in the Mokim HaKodesh Kachim. So that Rashbi holds that Aron Goren Bovela, says the Gemara Pliga the Ula. Ula is not arguing with the Tanach. Ula had another tradition as to what is the Shita of Rabbi Shimon. According to Ula, Rabbi Shimon Fakert holds that the Aron remained in Eretz Yisrael, Nignas, not Nitlu. The Amar Ula, Shoal Rabbi Masya ben Choresh es Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai beroimi. This is the Ma'asin Me'ilah. Remember the famous story that there was a Gzeira and the whole Chachma Rashbi put a demon into the daughter of the Caesar, and then he healed her, and that's the way he was Mavatal the Gzeira. So when he was then in Rome, so Rabbi Shimon ben Rabbi Masya ben Choresh lived in Rome, a Tana that lived in Rome. So now that the Rashbi was there, he chaptarai, he asked questions. So he asked Rashbi that our Braisa only quoted one verse, but there was another verse that Rabbi Eliezer used to prove that the Aron went into Golus, into Bavel. That Aron Golol Bavel, and the Gemara interrupts the question by saying, "Wait, I know one proof. What was the second proof?" So the first proof is, as we learned above, Huda Amaran Vayiviyeu Bavel im Klei Chemdas Beis Hashem. Klei Chemdas must be the Aron Kodesh. And Shniya Maidich. So there is another pasuk in Divrei Hayom. I'm sorry, from Eicha, where it says Vayetze mi Basiyan, that gone from the daughters of Tzion, Daf Nun Dalet, finally, Kol Hadara, all of her splendor. So what is the all of the splendor that left Bas Tzion? So my Kol Hadara. So teaches Rabbi Eliezer Chadara, that which is in its innermost chamber. Okay, so now that Rabbi Eliezer has two rayas, which sounds like he's right. He has two proofs. So Rab Masya ben Chorash asked the Rashbi, Ato, my Ato Omer, what is your opinion? Is that interesting expression? Amar Loi, to which the Rashbi responded, this is clearly not as he is recorded in the Braisa. Sha'ani Omer. I say like Ato, ma Ato, Sha'ani Omer, Oroin b'mekoimoi nignas. And he quotes the pasuk of Vayarichu Habadim, which is the pasuk of Rabbi Yehuda, that concludes with the words that it's Shom ad hayoyim hazeh, ad hayoyim hazeh must mean until today. And now this is just an observation. We're not trying to refute anything. So we have a machloikis. What did the Rashbi say? So now comes along Rabbah and he asks the following to Ula. Amalei Rabba Ula, you're telling me this was the proof of Rashbi. We also had that in the Braisa, the proof of Rabbi Yehuda. What's the proof? My mashma. Is it because it says Vayihi Yusham ad hayoyim hazeh? Is that a raya? That's not a raya, because the Cholechet Chsiv ad hayoyim hazeh. You're telling me it means forever? Lo'elamu? No. Let me go like this. Vaksiv. As hayevusi Yoshev Yerushalayim loy hoyrishu b'nei Binyamin. That the Yevusites were not completely driven out as we should have by the Bnei Binyamin. We allowed them to stay. And it says, Vayeshev hayevusi es b'nei Binyamin b'Yerushalayim ad hayoyim hazeh. Now, whether the few goyim that live in Yerushalayim are descendants of Yevusi, we're not going to challenge that. But we know that b'nei Binyamin, you can't say that forever there were Binyaminites that lived in Yerushalayim. How do we know that? Because we'll prove that there was a 52-year period where no man lived in Eretz Yisrael, in Yehuda, which would include in Yerushalayim. So even though the Torah writes Ad Hayoyim Hazeh, it doesn't mean forever. There was a break. And if you're going to tell me Hachinami Deloy Golu that the Bnei Binyamin there was never a time in history of since when we entered the Holy Land, since when we conquered Yerushalayim, that there was always Binyaminites? No. That there was a total of 52 years, that no Ish, at least Yidden, never lived in Yehuda. Now, what's amazing is just to put in context that, just like we mentioned that Nebuchadnezzar, right, he exiled King Yehoiachin, that the Golus that began at the end of Zman Bayis Rishon didn't happen in one moment. The 70 years that we knew that will be the time that will be in Golus in between Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni, it's amazing, is marked with two periods. Number one is 70 years after we began to be exiled, which is what we spoke about Melech Yoyachin. 70 years later is when Daryavish, we'll learn this in Megillah, the original, Kodesh, the Gemara says it's the same one, that not the daughter, not the son of Esther. He was the one that gave Rishus for us to rebuild the temple, and many Yidden moved back. So from when there was no Yishuv of Yidden, which culminated by the murder of Gedaliah ben Achikam, until when we began to go back, because Kurash allowed us to build a second temple, there was 52 years. But we didn't build it then, because Melech Yoyachin was exiled 18 years before the temple was destroyed. When did we actually finish building the second temple? 18 years later. A big part of that was the whole story of Purim. So the Goyim convinced the king in Persia to stop that permit, and we stopped building the second Beis HaMikdash. And only after the whole Maisa with Purim, and according to many opinions, when Koresh, which was, or Daryavish, again, this can be the same one, or the second Daryavish, the son of Esther, according to many, he was the one that restarted the building of the second Beis HaMikdash. But when it comes to how many years were there no Yidden living in Yehuda, a total of 52 years. And what was this proof? Sheneman, as it says, Allahadim, on these mountains, the mountains of Yehuda, Esa Bechi, I will raise up my voice of weeping, the nehiyan of wailing, the alma ois midbar, and regarding the pastures of the wilderness that used to be beautiful, kina, I'm saying a lament. Why am I lamenting? Ki nitzitsumi bli ish, because they are parched without a person oiver, without a person passing by. And we no longer can hear the sounds of the cattle, not from the birds of the heavens, like it became mamish desolate for those 52 years. Va'ad behema, nadadu alchu, they wandered and they went away. Now, how do I know it's 52 years? This is the best raya. Talmudic raya, because behema is bigamatria 52. Now, for those 52 years, no one was living there, which means Bnei Binyamin was not living there. So even though it says that in the beginning of the conquest of Yerushalayim, that's to our detriment. We did not drive out the Yevusin, but Bnei Binyamin lived with them ad hayom hazeh. Ad hayom hazeh doesn't mean forever. There was those 52 years that ad hayom hazeh did not mean ad hayom hazeh. Furthermore, the Tanya we learned Rabbi Yossi Yomer that you should know that even during those 52 years, there was a 7-year period that Neskaima Gofriz Vamelach, right? Gofriz Vamelach Sreifah Kol Artzah. That pasuk we have at the end by Moshe Rabbeinu that mamash happened in Israel. It was unlivable. Like for Amar Rabbi Yechon and my Talmud, the Rabbi Yossi, that for 7 years, where did he get that 7 years? Because he has a Gzeira Shava, covenant, bris. It says in Daniel that v'higbir bris lo rabim, that God forged a covenant or a strong covenant, right, with the great ones, which is the Gofres Vamelach, Shavua Echad, one cycle of 7 years. And it says over there in Nitzavim that va'amru, that's Gofres Vamelach Sefer Kol Artzo, but they're going to ask why, and va'amru ala sherazu was bris Hashem alekei avosim. It was uninhabitable. And de facto, no one was there for the Behema for 52. So you see that ad hayom hazeh doesn't mean forever. So what's the raya of the Rashbi? That's the kasha that Rabba asked Ula. So Amalei responds Ula to Rabba. Hachiksiv here in this pasuk regarding the placement of the Aron HaKodesh. It doesn't say ad hayom hazeh. It says vayihiyu sham ad hayom hazeh. Sham ad hayom hazeh. Taka means forever. You're asking a question from the pasuk in Shoftim. There it doesn't say that the Yevusim settled together with Bnei Binyamin. Sham. It only says ad hayom hazeh. So that's when it doesn't say sham. Taka doesn't mean forever. The Gemara is not happy. No. Meisvei akasha pasuk in Divrei Hayomim. It says umeihem mi bnei Shimon, that from some of them who were primarily from the tribe of Shimon, they went then to Har Seir. This is to finish annihilating the Amalekim. And who went in that war? Anashim Chamish Meos, 500 fighters. And now we're going to mention their leaders who were Bnei Shimon, Platia, the Na'ariya, Urefaya, the Uziel Bnei Yishai, who all of these were Bereisham. And what did they do over there in Har Seir? Vayaku Eshe'eris HaPleitel Amalek. They went to wage war to destroy the remnant of the Amalekim. Vayeshvu Sham Ad Hayom Hazeh. And now that we got rid of the Amalekim, who settled there? The Bnei Shimon. It says Sham Ad Hayom Hazeh. It cannot be forever. How can it not be forever? Because of Kfar Ola Sancheiriv Malachashu. The moment Sancheiriv came into the world and he came into the region, what he did was Bilbil Kol Ha'arotzos. Sheneman, as it says that Va'asid Gevulis Am, this is he, Sancheiriv speaking, that I will remove the boundaries of all people. Va'asud Doi Seyem Shoi Seisi, and I will plunder their treasures. And indeed, there isn't a place where you can say the people there are the original people that settled there. There's no such a thing in the world. The only place actually are the Yidden today in Eretz Yisrael, because we Baruch Hashem, we're back. The only time Yidden were not in Eretz Yisrael were for 52 years, and during those 52 years, the truth is no one was there. But here you see that it says that the Bnei Shimon were Sham Ad Hayom Hazeh, and today they're not there because Sancheiriv removed everyone from their place. So the Gemara says, indeed, this refutes the raya from the Rashbi. This refutes the proof, if that was the proof, from the word Sham Ad Hayom Hazeh, from Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Lakish. Now more details about those who opine that the Aron HaKodesh remained with us. Amar Rav Nachman. Tana, we learned in a Tana that it was hidden in the chamber of the wood. How beautiful, right? Right? It goes. So Dafka in that chamber. And Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak, Afananami Tanina. This is our Mishnah, guys, in Shkolim. This is what we learned, right? Pedig Vav, Mishnah base, that Maisa B'Koyin Echad, Shehoyim Misasek. Misasek means he was involved in something not that important. And during his being, he was just absent-minded, not focused on the Avodah. Viran, he noticed Ritzpa Meshuna, a stone on the ground that's not exactly like the others, Mechavri Seha, and he right away understood this is the stone that covers the passageway And but before he was able to give away to show him exactly where it is, he passed away. And everyone understood why he passed away. They knew then with certainty, Shesham Arin Ganus. Now, another might have what was he doing? He was playing around with his hatchet. Similar, and as we learned, even though Balimum cannot do that void directly, but when it came their time, they were there. There were certain preliminaries that they were allowed to do, and therefore they did. And that included Shrayamasli and Be'etzim, they would deworm the woods that are going to be put on the Mizbeach, and for that they had the Kalim, right? Hatchets. They both, everyone has this hatchet tradition. And the blade slipped off the handle and it fell. So when they came to retrieve it, that's how they noticed that. Now listen to this version. When the hatchet fell off over there, the yatzat saw H va'achulatu, and it consumed the hatchet. Not a coin, but the hatchet. Okay. So all of this is just to point out that in the Braisa that we had on Daf Nun Gimel Amud Beis, what was the shita that Aron b'mekoymai nignas? And here we're saying not exactly b'mekoymai, but b'lishkas beis so eitzim. Weiter, again, going back to the psukim that we quoted, that was used here from Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish or Rabbi Loi and Ashbi, that by Yihu Sham Ada Yom Hazeh, the pasuk begins how they moved around. They never removed the poles, but that they extended the poles to Rabbi Yehuda Rami. There's a contradiction. There's an inherent contradiction. It says Vayiro Rashi Abadim that they extended it to the point that the tips of the poles were seen. They were noticeable. Yeah, it says in the same verse, V'lo yiro achutza. So, what does that mean? Hakeitzad. The pshat is nidin ve'ein nidin. So this must be referring to the time that there was not a wall, but there was a curtain. All this is problematic. Again, Babayis Rishain, there was a wall and there was an Aron Kodesh. Babayis Sheni, that picture is not needed. Babayis Sheni, there was a curtain or two curtains, but there wasn't the Aron HaKodesh. But at some point, let's go back to the beginning in the Midbar. All right, and then later in the subsequent, in the Mishkan, in the Gilgal, even though the Aron wasn't always there, but in Mishkan Shiloi, they made sure that the poles not only go until the curtain, they actually protrude into the curtain. Not that they made holes in the curtains for the poles to extend for people to see the poles. No, but you were able to see the imprint of the badim leaning against and protruding out. Verstehst? That's the pshat nidin ve'ein nidin. And Tanya Nami Hachi, that vayiro Rashi Abadim yochol yiyuz zazin mimekayman. You would think that not only may you not remove them, you can't even move them at all. You can't slide them back and forth while they are in the rings. That you could do. No, they extended it. So it was symmetrically centered. And now once they put it to rest, they had the poles, a lot more of pole in the east than in the west of the Aron HaKodesh. You would think that all of that was, we should at least see the beams. We should see the bottom. And for that, they would have to make a little hole through which to put the badim through. No. So what's Pshat HaKeitzad? Doichkin, it would push against the curtain, and uboiltin, and it would therefore stick out, so to say, vayoitzin, and it would protrude in the paroiches. So the paroiches itself would have, you can see these two indentations. Let's see the picture Kevin is putting on. I don't see any indentations over here. Just some nice wing creatures. He's pointing. If you look very good, shvacha maisa. I don't know. Let's go weiter. And therefore, v'niren kishnei dade isham. Shneimar, as it says, that sroir hamoir doideli, that a bundle of mirth, a bundle of psamim is my beloved to me. And when a man gifts a woman something precious, she would put it on a necklace that would bane Shaddai Yolin. So the ketreires that is offered bein habadim. So now it fits because the badim were like the Shaddaiim of a woman that you can see from outside her garments. You can see the protrusion. The Marsha says that bein Shaddai, we have to play around with the letters. Is you have, what do we have over here? You have Shnei Bade. How great is that? Clear, the letters themselves form the same thing. In other words, that from the Keruvim, and this is connected to the fact that the Keruvim embraced each other, that the highest level of love that God made in this world for us to experience, for us to understand what type of love we have to God is between a man and his wife, between a wife and her husband. And that was the level of ahava that we were able to reach, especially during this man habayis. So therefore, including in the next sugya about the Keruvim hugging each other, embracing each other.
Would this make a problem in regards to the Kohen Gadol bringing the Keteris Bein Habadim?
Of course. Well, again, here's the challenge. During the times, just Bazman Bayis Rishon, there wasn't a curtain. So let's go back, let's say Mishkan, it must have been prior. Bazman Bayis Sheni, there was a curtain, there wasn't the Aron HaKodesh. But that would also mean, but there was such a moment. So either think about it. It's who says that he needed to stand in between the two badim? It says he needed to place it in between the two badim. Not so clear. He was facing the Aron HaKodesh. No, I take that back. He was facing the Aron HaKodesh. So the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Marash, lechatchila river. If he needed to get there, so did he go under? He went over.
But one second, why couldn't he just, let's say, slide the poles back?
It doesn't make sense that he would do that. It doesn't mean he wouldn't touch that. That's lechatchila river, maybe. I don't know. Good point. Weiter. Omanaf Katina. The time is running. Well, guys, don't worry. We'll catch up on Nun Vav with God's help.
Wasn't there a thing about the measurement of the actual poles where it was the exact size of the actual dimensions of the Kodesh Kachim? So Bechla would be a question how you could get by because it would kind of block his way.
No, without this, it wouldn't block his way, Danny. No. You're confusing that with the Keruvim that King Solomon made. That the wings went across the entire span, but that was above, not the bottom. All right. Wow. They would roll up the curtains. They would show how the Keruvim were joined one with the other. And the Kohanim would announce to the Yidden that would see it, which is on the level, how are we allowed to look at the Aron HaKodesh? Moshe Rab Chizdam says in the pasuk at the end of Bamidbar, this is the last pasuk in Bamidbar, that even when we were transporting the Klei Kodesh through the desert, and that was done by the Levium, but prior to the Levium approaching the holy Kalim, including the Aron HaKodesh, so you had these materials that the Parsha speaks about, beautiful materials that were used by Kohanim to cover all of the Kli Kodesh. Remember that? And we learned in Kachim that the fire, right, the heavenly fire, the lion, remained under the cover and it didn't burn the cover. How great was that? So why did they cover everything? And even the Levium were not allowed to look at it uncovered. It says, "V'lo yuvoyu lirois." They were not even allowed to look kibala es hakodesh when the holy became swallowed by the cover. So if even the Levium that transported the Aron HaKodesh were not allowed to look, even when they were covering it, even though we're traveling, all they looked when they saw it was already covered. But they opened up the Paroichesen and all the Yidden saw inside the Kodesh Kachim and they saw the Keruvim embracing. And for Omar, Rav Yehuda, Omar Rav, what does it mean? Kabbalas HaKodesh? That means b'shas hachnosas kelim l'nartik shalahem. Means even when they were put in their containers, even then, even the Levi were not allowed to look. Answers the Gemara. Listen to this. Omar Rav Nachman, Mashal Lekala, calls Manshi Bebeis Avia before she gets married. Then she's still removed from and therefore modest from her husband. But Kivin Sheba Asal Beis Chamia, the moment she gets married. And getting married, then there was times that you moved into the Hassan's parents' home, which is a very big statement because that would mean that the lav, it's a lav in the Torah, that that lav is temporary. That lav was only until when we moved into the Beis Hamikdash. Because all of the prior periods, whenever we were actually an azman that we would move from there to a next place, no, they never opened up the curtains, which is again a problem because when exactly did they open up the curtains? But at least in the midbar, let's go. At least in the midbar, it was kekala that's not married, beis aviyah. And once, at some point, we were like married, and once you're married, then you don't have these inyanim of tznius. Wow. We just learned above, and why it sounds like, why did he die? Because he was about to show people how to find the Aron HaKodesh. If we are allowed to look at the Aron Kodesh, because now we're married, what was the issue? Now this story happened bisman by Yesheni. So answers the Gemara, no, we were divorced. Now, make it clear. We were divorced and remarried. But Nizgarshu Chazru Lichibasa Harashona, meaning when a couple is divorced, there should be no chiba. But if a man remarries the wife that he divorced, you don't go back to where you left off. You have to build a new relationship up. So just like the first time around, there was a zman and when we were not allowed to look at the Aron Kodesh until we reached the level of marriage. Same thing, Bisman by Yesheni, even though Zman by Yesheni, we're remarried. Hashem was, so to say, machzir de gerusha, even though in other contexts we were never divorced, but I'm just in this example. But even though we had a bias, we were not like we were when we were married the first time. And therefore, at that zman, we were not allowed to look at the Aron Kodesh. Now, fragt the Gemara, exactly when did they roll up the curtains? There was nothing to roll up. Even Mikdash Sheni may have a kruvim. Gives the Gemara two approaches. And that they had the Aron HaKodesh. Umay paroiches the bavi. There were other curtains that needed to be rolled up. In other words, as the Amar Rav Zera Amar Rav, there was a total of shloisha asar paroiches. There were 13 curtains, and we learned above these are humongous curtains and how much they costed, and you needed to remember the 300 kahanim to toivel them. That was in I think in Shkalim. 300 paroiches in Hayiba Migdash. Shiva keneged the Shiva Sh'arim of the Azara. That's according to those who hold that Azara at 7 shiur. Shtayim achas lepischei shel heichal va'achas lepischei shel ulam. And Shtayim b'dvir. This is already the second Beis Hamikdash. So two of them was the curtain. There were two. And Shtayim kenegden ba'aliyah. Just like we see clearly that in the Zman by Yesheni, likewise says Rashi, Zman by Yisrishon, other than this Amotaraxin that did not have two paroiches and all else had curtains. So the pshat is that they lifted up all of the other curtains. There was a curtain covering the antechamber. You needed to lift that. There was a curtain also covering the entrance to the Heichel. So they rolled up all of the curtains so you can see inside. Now that's not so simple yet, because so what if they saw inside? But at the end, there is a wall. But here comes again, maybe the opening on the northern side, according to those who hold that was taka open, and maybe from a certain angle they can see inside. Tzarechiyun, to understand further. Another approach is and taka they opened up, and you fully opened up into the Holy of Holies, and you saw inside. There is no Aron HaKodesh. This is a very important Gemara. Keruvim the tzurta havakaima, the images of the keruvim that were bitsura. So the tzura was not so simple, whether it was painted, which is not boilet, right, or not indented, or whether this was taka engraved, as it says, there was engravings on the wooden or later golden panels. Remember, we learned one of the things they would use, the surplus of the shkalim, was to make the panels out of gold. So whether it was wood or whether later it was upgraded to gold. So they had images, and some of the images, not all of them, were kruvim. And they wanted for us to see those images, how the wings of the keruvim were embracing each other. As it says, this is regarding Bayis Rishon, the building of King Solomon, the Eis Kol Kiras HaBayis, and all of the walls of the temple. All of the walls means, including of the Kodesh Kachim, is Meisaf Kala. We're surrounded by designs. From what? Keruvim, and Usemoirois, palm trees, and Upeturei tzitzim, blossoms of flowers, and Vetzipa Zahav Meshad Es HaMechuka, and they overlaid these engravings with gold. So there was a whole piece of art on the walls. And Uksiv, and it says Kema'ar Ish, v'loy as the joining of a man who's going with his companion. Oh, that's the pshat. Now, before we just finish reading that, since we are on Daf on Amud Aleph, look inside the top Tosfos. So he begins when it says that you had these images that were carved out and then covered with gold on the walls of the entire Beis HaMikdash. So he writes Tosfos, Nishalti al oisam shemitzayim b'machzorim tzuros chayes v'oifes. Certain machzorim or sedurim, you have beautiful paintings in the sefer, and they asked me im yafa oisim im lav. So Tosfos says, I responded, it's for sure not good, because when they're looking at all of these beautiful paintings, so it's not, ashkafically, it's not good. Miu ein kanisur. You can't say it's prohibited because it says, and the proof that Tosfos brings us from our Gemara. You're kidding? In the temple, they had all of these images engraved. And let's turn to just to look inside this huge, humongous Tosfos. And he starts bringing various different Yesoidistic approaches. Number one, the second line on the top is the issue is only b'choisem boilet. And even though, as we just said, that these engravings were not like a painting, they were engraved, that's called a choisem shoikeya, that's not a problem. What is similar to idolatry if it's protruding? Now, the Kruvim was a standalone. God said to make them. To Moshe over the Pareiche, over the Kapoiris. To Shloima again standalone. That's mamish a choisem boiler. That's a statue. That's an exception. But these engravings, they were talking not paintings, but shoikeya is not problem with boilers. Then he writes, Tosfos, that there's a difference whether it's a standalone or whether it's part of a building, which is less problematic. And then Tosfos, I'm just going, reading different little shtiklach. He writes, the chol minei parzufen muter lasois afilu chakukin v'choisma boilet. Tosfos actually writes that even protruding images, little statues, you cannot say that no image can be made. You could. There are only certain things that may not be made. And he gives an example from the face of a man, l'chudei, or from the face of all of the four partzufim that we have in the Nevuah of Yecheskel, of the Kisei Yaakov, Adam Aryeh Shoyd and Nesher. They're very important Tosfos here. I want to go furthermore that when the picture taking became more common, just to know that there was a time that many Gedolei Yisrael felt that it's usher to have your picture taken from you, connected to this isur of leisasa l'chapesa l'chol temuna. And there it's not choisem or not boilet. And ultimately, halachically, it was acceptable. But just to know that al pi Kabbalah, it's very detrimental to the neshama once they pass away to have pictures of them in Olam Hazeh. And great tzaddikim, including, I think this is from our Rabbeim, who understood that when we will have a picture of a tzaddik, it will help our avodas Hashem. They said, let it be disadvantageous for us by having our pictures here. It's going to hurt us, beruchnius, as long as it helps another yid in his avodas Hashem. Okay, let's come back to the last line of Daf Nun Dalet. So, kamad ish v'lo yoyse mai, kamad ish v'lo yoyse amar Abba bar Abshila, Daf Nun Dalet on base on top of the Amid. Ke ish hamo oira balavoya shaloi, like a man who was joined by his companion. In other words, that we saw again. So these images, they were hugging each other. And furthermore, Amar Reish Lakish, that b'shah shenichnasu nachrim laheichal, during the Churban Abayis, ra'u keruvim ha'ma'oidim zebazeh, they also saw these keruvim. And by the way, this can even mean during the times, we had this in Saita, Bezman Bayesheni, even Bezman Bayesrishan. According to the version that we nignas, we said Yoshiyahu hit it approximately 35 years before the Churban. So when the Babylonians came in, they didn't see the actual keruvim, but what did they see? They saw these images embracing each other. And Hoitzion Lashuk, how do you take the building out? You peel it off the walls. They took the panels off. And Va'amru Yisrael Halalu, who are so spiritual to the point that they knew that Sheberchasam Bracha, that whoever we bless, Taka gets a bracha. That was the koyach God gave to Avram Avinu and subsequently to us. Uklalasam klala is Yasku B'dvarim Halalu. They bedecked what their holiest sites with these sensual images. No. So miyad hizilam, they debased these images. Shenemer, as it says again, we read the Senechel that kol mechabdeah, that all who once respected her, his ilua debased her. Kiro ervasa, because they saw her nakedness. And the pshat is, what they debased it. They didn't do anything to it. It's very important that when you look at something and you're looking to its ruchnius, then you see something exalted. When you look at anything and all you see is the gashmius, that re'iyah debases it. So when we would see during the regal, we would see some keruvim embracing each other. What did we see? We saw the love that Hashem has toward the Yid and the love that a Yid has towards Hashem. We saw that. It was the most uplifting, inspiring image to see. We saw what it represented. We saw the pnimius. If you only look at the chitzonius, then it's very debasing. They're only having an image of a man and a woman embracing each other. Okay. So we have, what we'll do is, we'll stop over here again, and we'll get as much as we can get, and whatever we won't finish, we'll make up, God willing, on Daf Nun Vav, God willing, to be continued.
Yeah.
What a daf.
Rabbi, to just recap the question about the Aron. So one answer was it was in the first Beis HaMikdash, but somehow there were other curtains that they lifted that enabled them to see it.
That's very difficult to understand. Yeah, clear. No, 1 second. There was definitely curtains.
And the second answer was that it's in the second Beis HaMikdash. It wasn't the actual curtain. It was just like the pictures they had on the wall.
So the second answer is easy to understand because Taka, they opened up all the curtains and they saw in the Holy of Holies. But if it's the first Beis HaMikdash, even if they would pick up all the curtains, they couldn't see inside the Kodesh HaKodshim. So maybe the pshat is that also in the Heichal you had these keruvim on the walls. So the Taka didn't see inside the Kodesh HaKodshim. Could be that's the pshat. They only saw the images that were on the walls of the Heichal.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Am I understanding correctly that we're talking about the images on the walls being like animated?
So that's not so clear. That's not so clear. It did become clear, if you remember, Yaakov, when we learned Soita, that in Soita also, when they were made by Moshe Rabbeinu, they were not mo'odim zebozeh. So they were the wings were, the tips were touching each other, but they were not mo'odim, means they're like intertwined with each other. Yeah, that would mean, Yaakov, that whatever miracle happened to the Kruvim happened to these images as well. Yeah, that's what it means. I'm just going to get some more coffee. I'm back, guys, in mamash 30 seconds.
Where exactly did we leave off? Does anybody know? Are we in still 54A somewhere? Or where the cherubs and the curtain?
54B, Bruce.
Anybody at all? Huh?
54B.
Oh, 54B. Okay. Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate it.
All right. That one, hey. Okay, let us go. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Nun Hey. Before we begin with the intro for today's Daf, we are actually up to Daf Nun Daled Amid Beis, and we left off towards the top of the Amid by the 2 dots. So the last sugya we learned was regarding the Keruvim, that even when the Goyim entered the Beis HaMikdash, they saw the Keruvim that were embracing one and the other. And the big question is, just to follow up right before we began, that the Yaakov was really pointing out that l'chu'ura, that means that this was a miraculous animation. Because the Keruvim, if they were modeled like the Keruvim that were on top of the Kapoides, like the Keruvim that Shlomo HaMelech added Zman by Yisrishan, they were not made in a way that they were, so to say, embracing each other. But this is some sort of nest. As we began yesterday, we read a little bit from the Zohar that the Keruvim Mamish, their wings are moving and they're playing music. It was a miraculous thing. So the big question is that they were not always embracing each other. That we know clearly. That whenever we were not doing what we needed to do, when the Yidden were not that in love with God, then the Keruvim physically were not embracing each other. So Bisman HaChurban, Churban means is that there's a Churban. If there's a Churban, then the Keruvim should have been facing opposite directions. But Bisman HaChurban, they were embracing each other. That's the big question. And the Alter Rebbe in Parshas Pekudei has a gewaltige insight. He teaches Pekudei, Elei Pekudei, Chayiv Adam Lifkoit es Ishtoi, B'Shashi Yotze L'derech. That before a man goes on a trip, there's an obligation on the man to have a union with his wife. So the Alter Rebbe says that even Bisman HaChurban, B'Pnei Chatoeinu, doesn't change the love. And the very fact that we were being sent away into Galus, so there was a Chayiv Adam Lifkoit, there was a certain closeness that God showed us. Imagine then, which would inspire us and give us the koyach to live like Eden for the almost 2,000 years that we were tragically in Galus. So yeah, even when the Goyim, or Dafka when the Goyim entered the Heichel, the Keruvim were embracing each other. And how great was that? Now we're going to continue on Daf Nun Daled Amud Beis, going to the Even HaShasiyah. We're going to learn, it looks very little. This is a very important sugya. And this is part of those areas in Torah that without Pnimius HaTorah, all you do is read the words. It's good to know that there's so many layers of understanding that we're not yet Zoichet Achap. At least we're reading the words. But I'm going to suggest a L'chu'ura insight based on what we learned in Chassidus, how to perhaps understand better exactly the machloikas of Tanoim. From where was the world created? How did the physical creation take place? And Daf Nun Hey proper, we're going to go back to something that we repeatedly learned in the Mishnah, that when the Dam HaPod and when the Dam HaSoid were sprinkled, whether it was sprinkled inside the Aron HaKodesh. First of all, in the Aron HaKodesh, we made it clear that it was not sprinkled in a way where it needed to actually touch the kapoides, even though these are the words that the Torah uses. It doesn't mean touching the kapoides, but it means towards the kapoides. But there was achas l'mayla v'sheva l'mata. Now we're going to spend a lot of time focusing on two psukim we have in Achri Mois, which is Vayikra Perek Tez Zayin. We're going to have psukim Chav Yudalid and Tez Vav. One pasuk Yudalid speaks about the sprinkling of the Dam HaPod. In that pasuk, it's going to be very simple. In that pasuk, it's not clear how many times was the blood sprinkled l'mayla. It's not clear. But in that pasuk, it says explicitly that lamata is sheva pa'amim, 7. The next pasuk that speaks about the sprinkling of the dam hasoir has it clear that by the dam hasoir it's achas lamayla, but it's not clear how many lamata. So we're going to have a few braises that are going to teach us how we get from the Torah Shebachsav, that which we know already from Torah Shebal Peh, that both of these bloods were sprinkled the same way, achas lamayla and the sheva lamata. And then we're going to move on to the machlokes we had on the Mishnah between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda regarding how many stands, golden stands, did we have in the Heichal? Was there one stand or was there 2 stands? Why would Rabbi Yehuda not allow for there to be 2 stands? So we will attempt to make a correlation between this Shitas Rabbi Yehuda and that which we learned just recently in Shkolim regarding the 13 shofros that we had in the Azara. 2 of the shofros were used to place money for bird karbanos. The Mishnah says the words, one was for kinim, one was for goizli oila. And as we will see, the machlokes that Rabbi Yehuda held that neither of them was a shofar, was a pushka, was a box, was a chest for which someone who had a chiyuv to bring pairs of birds, no one who had a chiyuv had the luxury of just putting it into the box. And perhaps, as we'll see, that's the Havamina, one shita, that Rabbi Yehuda is afraid that even if you write on something what it is meant for, lav dafka people will be able to look, or they'll focus on the writing and they'll confuse one with the other. Not wanting to confuse the chayva with the nadava, Rabbi Yehuda held that there was no box for the chayva. Both of them was for bird nadavas, as we'll elaborate. We're going to chaza what we learned in Shkolim. And similarly, l'chayra, don't forget that dam hapar always has to come before dam hasoid. So Rabbi Yehuda did not want for us to have two stands, because how would you make sure that you don't confuse one with the other? Because you would write on it, this is for the part, this is for the soil. That's the first approach. Rabbi Yehuda does not subscribe that writing is sufficient to make sure we don't confuse one with the other. Actually, that's going to be disproved. And we're going to move on. That's going to really lead us into Daf Nun Vav, another understanding, Bishitas Rabbi Yehuda, which will really come back to the whole Shita of Bereda, which will be a famous Daf of Bereda, which we have mamash almost verbatim a few times throughout Shas. But Chavra, let us start on Daf Nun Dalid Amid Beis. Right, we are in the top half of the Amid by the two dots, referring back that since the Mishnah, our Mishnah, the last Mishnah, used the words Mishanit al Arain. So therefore, since the Nevi'im Rishonim, we said Shmuel and David revealed that the stone that was always there, that we call the Even Shesiyah, the foundation stone, the stone remained. So when the Aron Kodesh was above the ground, it was on the Even Shesiyah. So even when we didn't have the Aron Kodesh, the Kohen Gadol knew exactly where to put down the Machta, upon which he would put the Ketaitis from a second Chafina, because it was on the same place. Okay. So Ushesiyah Hoysa Nikres, says the Gemara. That Tony we learned in a Braisa. What's Pshat Shesiyah? The translation of Shesiyah is foundation. Shemimeno Hushesa Sa'olam. From this stone the world was founded. So our Gemara says, yeah, not everyone agrees to that. Tanan, our Mishnah, is only like one Manda Amar. Tanan Kemanda Amar, that means Tzion Nivra Ha'olam. Now Tzion really is referring generally to Yerushalayim, but just to have, for the sake of clarity, when you speak about Yerushalayim, the soul of Yerushalayim is the Beis HaMikdash. Very important. So today, when we daven Uvenei Yerushalayim, people say, what do you mean Uvenei Yerushalayim? Yerushalayim was never built as beautiful as it is today. Well, yeah, not Yerushalayim. That which extends from Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is the Beis HaMikdash. So Mitzia Nivra Ha'olam. And in the Beis HaMikdash itself, from the Holy of Holies, which would mean the Even HaShesiyah. The Tanya, and here we go through all the various Yeshitas, starting with the first wide line. Rabbi Eliezer Oimer Oilam Emtsoy Isoy Nivra. The world was created from its center. The center Pasha means from its core. Shneimar, as it says, I Gavaldika words of Eov, that God is telling him that for him to understand the present, he has to go back to the beginning. And God is speaking about the beginning, that Bitsekes, Afar, Lamutzak, that when dirt is poured to a single bedrock, and then uregavim yidubako, then clumps of earth were stuck around the core. So that's what we would call the ultimate milmato lamaila, from the in out, and in means mamish from the center. Second shita is the opposite. Rabbi Yeshua oimer oila minatzadadim nivra, that the world was created from, so to say, its four sides, from its four edges. That the physical world began from the most peripheral part, and not from one point, but from four different points, from the Dalad Ruchais, and it went Dimizak Milmailo Lamato, and they began to extend until they all joined. And he quotes a pasuk, which is a very a topic that's discussed a lot in Sefer Yetzirah about the concept of snow, some in between of substance and not. So it says Ki Lasheleg Yomer, that God says to the snow, heavy at it, you become the earth. Now, where did the snow come from? So he speaks about V'geshen Matar, V'geshen Mitrais Uzoi, from showers of rain and from showers of mighty rain. Did we get the snow? And then from the snow came the earth. The vart is that the rains come from Milmaila. So that's his raya, that it wasn't the earth was created from its core and then it extended outwards. The world began from the out and it went in. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says that Even Yora Kodesh Baruch Hu Bayam. He's speaking about there's a sea, there's Alma Discasio. Then God threw a stone into the Yam, and now Mimenu Nishta So'ilam. And from this stone, the whole world was founded, or the solid part of the world was founded. Shenemar Almo Adonai Hutba'u. Again, this is God, right, speaking L'chayra to Eov. Do you know, he tells him, into what were its bases sunken? Do you know Eov? You know the beginnings. Who cast down the cornerstone? And the fourth shita, which is what our Mishnah is going to follow, the shita's chachamim, the chachamim nivra. No, the world began from Tzion, which means from the makayim of the Beis Hamikdash. Shenemar, as it says, Mizmar from Asaf, le Asaf, Keil Elokim, O Almighty God, Hashem. Ve'omer, and it says further, Mitzion Michlal Yoifi. So we teach Mimenu Muchlal Yoifi Yoishel Oilam, that the beauty of the whole world comes from Tzion, meaning over here the whole world comes from Tzion. Now I want to share the following. We learned over Shavuos, the Rebbe's Maimer of Mishar Sheikdimu Yisrael Nasav Nishma Tavshin Chafei. And it's a Moide de Kamaimer in which the Rebbe really explains that you have two Seder Shtalshalis. Mamish. You have God's creation, which we are coming from the Ein Sof into a physical world. It's Milmaila Lamata. But then we learned that even before the Ein Sof, when we're going to Atzmos, that what was the original cause for all the causes? What motivated God to create before you even had the Ein Sof? So the quote of Chazal that the Eibishter was Nimlach b'nishmoiseim shal tzadikim, and as the Rebbe points out, va'amech kulam tzadikim, and how this is explained by the Maggid, as Chassidus very often quotes, that God has in his essence the imprint of a Yid neshama beguf, banamatim. And this imprint, even though that we were only created much later, but God is Lamayla Mazman. So the original cause of whole creation is a Jew here keeping the mitzvahs. Obviously, beginning with a Yid doing the avoid in the Beis Hamikdash, that's the Iker place where we keep the mitzvahs. That was the cause. So creation is Milmata Lamayla. Mamish, this is the question. What's if it's Milmayla Lamata, like first you have the Amal Diskasya, then you have the Amal Disgalia. If it's Milmayla Lamata, Shitas Rabbi Yoshua, you have Minat Tzadadim Nivra. And by the way, that's mamish related. Milmayla Lamata. The Milmayla Lamata was Benisan Nivru Ha'ilam. It's all connected. Rabbi Eliezer, that's Milmata Lamayla. Milmata Lamayla means Ma'em Tzayisoi. But Ma'em Tzayisoi, it's not just the physical core of the world. It has to be from Yidden. The core of the world must be, the Chachamim say, it's from a Yid. A Yid, Neshama Beguf, is beginning with the Kohen Gadol doing the Avodah on Yom Kippur. That is the original cause of all of the creation. Here he's called Rabbi Eliezer Agad. This is the same we just read in Pirkei Avos. Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanes, the Talmud of Yechem and Zakai, that Eile told us Hashamayim v'ha'aretz bihi baram v'yoyim asay savay elikim eretz v'shamayim. Taiches Rabbi Eliezer told us Shamayim was created from Shamayim. This is all behemshach. That know that the heavenly bodies are created from the heavens. We're not now Bigashmias that Rashi writes. Told us Shamayim is ma'oiros. The two luminaries, the sun and the moon and the kechavim. Beruchnis we're speaking about. In other words, there is a shita that says that the cause of physical creation came from something that was physical, but the cause of spiritual creation came from something heavenly. Told us, ha'aretz ma'aretz nivru. But again, the chachamim l'shitasam know that this is the original cause of all creation. Because of this, there was b'chal an Ein Sof. Ein Sof doesn't mean Ein Tchila. What we call in Chassidus Atzmos, that was the beginning. And why? What was wrong with it just being the way it was? Because it wanted a Yid keeping mitzvahs. So everything came from Milmat. Even all of the Olamas prior, the Ein Sof came about from the Aretz. As it says that Mizmar Yosef Keil Elikim. God, oh God Almighty, Hashem Dibir, God speaks, and Vayikra Eretz, and God calls forth the earth. Mizrach Shemesh Ad Mevay, from the rising of the sun to its setting. And V'omer, that when God called forth, where did it come from? Michlal, Mitzion Michlal Yoifi, that all of the beauty really originates from Sion. God speaks out, Elikim Hoifia, meaning Mimenu from Sion, Muchlal Yoifyoi Shel Olam. And somehow this is a raya that it's not just the Gashmistic world, but it's even told by Shamayim, the cause is from the Aretz, meaning the Emtsoi Isoi, meaning the Eden, which means automatically the Beis Hamikdash and us, the Iker, it's not just a physical place, but the Yid serving God through our avoid of Torah and mitzvahs. All right, last line in the Amit. Now we're going to get into a technical, beautiful back and forth of Psukim, clarifying where do we see in Torah Shabbat that which we know from Torah Shabbat Peh, how exactly did the Kohen Gadol sprinkle the dam both towards the ark covering, then towards or on the paroiches. So it says in the Mishnah, the last line of the Amid, not l'sadam. This is the first time after the Ketores. He goes now and he takes the blood of the bull, always in every location. The dam of the par comes before the dam of the soir, and the dam of the bull was not on the ground like the machta was. No, that was held by someone that's steering Memishim Amaras boy. And how did he sprinkle it? So, etc., like matzlif. So what's matzlif? So Machavei, Rabbi Yehuda showed. This is something that if you have a visual, you'll chap a lot better than reading it from words. Showing it means kiminagdina, like someone who's giving malchus. Now here again, you have different shitas, what it means. So Rashi says, as we spoke out, that when you give malchus, the whipper doesn't want for the whip to hit the same place in the back of the whippy. It's going to hurt him. Dafnished. Do what God wants. Don't exaggerate. God forbid. So every blow falls on a different place. So, and as we just speak it out again, that lamaila means that the palm of your hand is facing up, or the way the Braisa will say the back of your hand is facing down. Don't get confused. Whenever it says the lamaila means lamata, it means is the reference the palm or is the reference the back? But lamaila means that after he would dip his finger in the mizrak of the dam of the bull, he would put the palm up, the back of his hand down, and he would flick it up. That is what Rav Yehuda did. He made that motion. Now, what happens then is when you're throwing it this way, that which is being projected makes as an up arch because your finger went up. And really, the meaning of al hakapoides, as we'll learn from Torah Shabbat Peh, not that it hit the kapoides. No, it landed on the ground before the Aron HaKodesh. Al means that because you did it l'mayla, that one was in the airspace above the kapoides for a moment. And then it would fall the closest. I don't want to use a mashal lahavdil from playing baseball because we're speaking about something holy over here. But you understand, when your hand is up, it goes high. When your hand is down, it's a whole different movement. Then he goes, I'm a Brazilian, I take back my whole baseball, so garnish it on it. Garnish from baseball. Halavai a little bit over here. So let's go over here. When you the other 7 was your palm is facing down, the back of your hand is facing up. And the matzlif meant, according to Rashi, that he made an effort that wherever the first one hit, the subsequent 7, each one should fall closer to him. That's pshat kematzlif. Not on the same place. Now let's begin, Chaber. If you have a chumash, that's good. You don't need a chumash. I'll say it out by heart. It says like this: in Achrei Mois, which is in Vayikra Tez Zayin and Pasuk Yud Dalid, the Torah says, "V'lokach midam hapor, v'hizo be'etzboi al penei hakapoides." Now, it doesn't say how many times. We don't even understand this to mean one time, because the emphasis here is that it should be on the pnei hakapoides. Then it says, "Vaited velifnei hakapoides," before the kapoides, yaza sheva pa'amim. Whenever the pasuk says al, whenever it says lifnei, so the way the Tanoim use the words, it's lamaila and lamato, because the al was the one taka not on top, but it came the closest, because your finger was up, went high, it went far. When your hand is down, then things fall closer, naturally. And then the lifnei means lamata, just to get that clear. That's pasuk Yud Dalet. Pasuk Tezvav continues that v'shachat, as we said, that the shechita didn't even happen of the soil. But when he would leave after doing the avoid of the dam hapor that he would place on the kan hazov, l'kula alma, there was one kan. Then the pasuk says v'shachat esir achatas asher lo'am, because the seir, the par, that was the whole. Was it his? Was it a shutfim? Was it a tzibur? The soil was everyone's. Vehevi as domai elmi beis laparoiches. Beis laparoiches means he went into the holy of holies. Then it says va'asa as domai kasher asa l'dam hapor. Really, that's enough. He would do the same thing, but the pasuk continues. V'hiza oisoi, singular, ala kapoides. That is understood to mean once. The word oisoi is not written by the pod. By the pod, we don't know how many lamailo. We don't know how many should be al penei. It just says v'hiza be'etzboi. Doesn't say a number. Here, v'hiza oisoi ala kapoides means once from the side, and then it says v'liftei akapoides. How much? Doesn't say. Okay, now we got that. Let's go. Top line on Daf Nun Hey. Tana. We learned in Abraisa, when he sprinkles the dam, he doesn't sprinkle it on mamish on loyla maila v'loyla mata. When we learned the Mishnah, when we say this in Davening Yom Kippur, not on the higher edge of the covering, not to hit the lower edge, not to touch it at all. Ella keneged oivi yashal kapoides, opposite the thickness of the ark, opposite, not on top of it. Very good. When it says achas lamaila, what does lamaila mean? Mitzaded yodoy lamata. He turns his hand down. Guys, don't get confused. This braisa is speaking about the back of the hand. So achas lamaila is when he turns the back of his hand lamata. And when it says later that the other 7 is lamata, again we're looking now at the back of the hand. That means mitzaded yodoy. He turns the back of his hand up. So his finger, naturally, when you sprinkle, it's going to hit closer without making an extra effort. You know, Amelia, how do you know that it's not on the ark cover? The Torah says, al. The pasuk puts it together. Now, don't even mention v'lifnei hakapoides by the sword. Why? Because the gama milamata the par, as we'll see in a moment, the Torah doesn't even say how many times you sprinkle it lamata and pasuk tezvav. So where do you know it from? You learn it because you do to the sword like you do to the. Don't mention it at all. So lamal nemar. So why does the Torah say the lifnei hakapoides and pasuk tezvav? Says the baraisa la akushe, to make a comparison, to make a hekesh from the al to the lifnei. The lifnei is the teacher. Lifnei doesn't mean on top. Lifnei means before. So that teaches the student, which is the al, that they are similar. They have to be similar, meaning mal lifnei, the lav al, in front, not on top, on the ground. So even the al, the lav al, frekte gemara or frekte braisa adarab, lo yomer lamayla apart, same kasha. The Torah doesn't say how many numbers, how many times he's printed al. The Torah and the pasuk tesvav only mentions the seva lifnei. On the al, it doesn't say. How do you know what you did it? Because the Torah says in pasuk tezvav, asa es domai kasher asa. We compare. So if we're comparing them anyway, don't mention it. The gamar milmaila, we know the number of how many times he sprinkled it on top from the number of the soid. By soid, it doesn't say number 1, but like the fact that it says v'hiza oisoi ala kapoides, that means 1. So takolama nemar. Why don't we say this direction? Why don't we say la'akushe, that even when the Torah says v'lifnei, it should be like al. Fakert, leave the al kepshutai. Al means on top. And then add that lifnei also means on top. One is further, one is closer, but maybe they all have to go on top of the arm or on top of the covering. Ma al mamish. Why don't we say al lifnei mamish? So counters the Gemara. Hi mai. No, that would not work. Because amrad bishleima, the way we said it, the way it is, that lamata the soy it is mentioned in pasuk tezvav la akushe. Lamaila the par, like we explained, la kushe, to make a hekish, that what? That the al is like the lifnei, none of it touches the aron kodesh. Then, like you mentioned before, why is it that God has to mention b'chlal and pasuk tez you dalid? Why does it have to say al panei akapoides if the Torah is not giving you a number? Say nothing, and we will already know from the fact that it says va'asa es domai kasher asa. I have another limit for that. It's going to work. What's the other limit? The Tanach of Elyahu ben Yaakov, when it says in pasuk Yud Daled al Pnei Hakapoides, there the Torah adds the words Kedma. That whole statement is needed to tell you Zeh Bona'av that every time it says Pnei, face means east, and that's very important. So, for example, when it says that Al Yavi b'choleis el HaKodesh, Mi beis la peroiches el penei hakapoides. And if you enter chayiv misa, you know when a person, God forbid, is chayiv misa b'dei shamayim, when they enter, if they enter el penei hakapoides, if they enter the kodesh kachim through the eastern entry, which is the way the Kohen Gadol entered. But if you're going to enter from the elevators, the manual elevators that the people that came to do refurbishment, they were lowered from the ceiling, they're not violating anything because El Penei HaKapoides means dafka you can't enter from the east side. And other areas where we need to know that Penei means from east to west. Oh, so that's going to fit. But Elai Amrat that Lamaila, the pod will be the source of the Hekish in the opposite direction. And from that we will learn Adarabba, that even the Velifnei HaKapoides has to be Al Mamish, then there'll be a problem. Lamata the soil lama also. You won't have a teretz. Why did the Torah have to speak about the Velifnei HaKapoides and Pasuk Tezvav when it doesn't mention a number? Anyways, you need a hekish. Don't write anything. Gewaldik. So therefore, clear that the extra is to make a hekish that just like Lifnei means not on, even the Al doesn't mean Kipshutai. Gewaldik. Let's go weiter. Second to last narrow line. Tanarabanan Pasuk Tezvav. Vehiza oisoi. We're speaking about the dam of the soil. Oisoi means it beloshen yachid. You sprinkle it, the blood, on the kapoides one time, and then velifnei hakapoides. How many times? It doesn't say. So lamatnu kama lamaila besoir achas. The Torah here is alluding to one on top. However, lamata besoir any of their kama. How many times? So it says, but I saw it any done. I'll tell you the following. Nemru damim lamata b'parim pasuk yudalid. It says clearly by the pad yaza sheva pamim. The nemru lamata b'soir. So we compare one to the other. Ma lamata b'pad is sheva. Af lamata b'soir sheva. Nice, says the Braisa. Maybe not. Efshenish. Oikalach l'derech maybe go on a whole different path, which will be an opposite path with an opposite conclusion. Maybe say nemru damim lamayla b'soir. The nemru damim lamata b'soir. Look inside pasuk Tezvav, compare one to the other in the same animal. Malamaila besoid, we understand vihiza oisoi ala kapoides to mean once. Achas, then the lifnei akapoides is vague. So learn soid from soid. Aflamata, maybe by the soid, it's only achas. Why didn't you say that? Answers the Braisa. Oh, so you have two options. So then we have to use our seichel. Nira lemidoimam. Let's see, right, to which we're speaking about the sprinkling of the soil, lamata, to what is it most similar? Done in mata mimata. The ain't done in mata milmailo, says the Gemara. Why? Maybe adarabba done in gufay me gufay. At least, even though it's taka, you're learning the lamata from the lamailo, but you're sticking within itself. Why don't we say done in gufay me gufay? The ain't done in gufay me alma. Me alma means from an outside law. Pot is outside. So indeed, now says the Braisa that Pasik Tezvav writes before it goes into the details. It says va'asa as damay kasher asa ladam hapar. Why did you need to write that? Anyways, you wrote v'hiza oisai ala kapoides v'lifnei hakapoides. Why do you have to compare the bloods together? Talmud lemid va'asa as damay. This is the Pasik Tezvav. This is about the soil. Yudalad is the part. Tezvav is the soil. Va'asa as damay kasher asa ladam hapar. She'ain Talmud lemid. The whole thing is extra. Don't write anything. Don't write kasher asa, because the Torah spoke how you do the par. The Torah now speaks about the soil. Everyone is a standalone pasuk. Uma Talmud leimer kasher asa. No, sheyu kol asi yoisav shavois. Meaning kishem shalamata bepad explicitly. Yudalid. The pasuk says yaze sheva pa'amim. Kach lamata besoil should be sheva. Says the Braisa weiter. Good. So now you explained lamadnu. We learned. Kama lamata bepad, because it's written explicit, and from it we teach to the sa'ir who's the student. So we also know that sa'ir is 7. But now let's focus on the same limud. How many times did you sprinkle it? Lamaila. Lamaila bepad eino yodeya. If you open up a chumash again, just to make it clear, the Torah doesn't write the way we would think explicit by the sa'ir once. But the understanding of v'hiza oisoi ala kapoides means once. And by the par where it says v'lakach midam par v'hiza be'etzboi al pnei kapoides keigmam, doesn't say oisoi. We have no idea. So v'hareni done. So let's make a limit. Let's use our minds. Nemar damam lamata lamayla b'soir. That there is b'chlal an avoid of lamayla. And it says damam lamayla b'par. So now let's compare the numbers one to the other. Ma l'mayla b'so'id, clearly, that's clear, is achas. So af l'mayla b'par is oichet achas. Says the Braisa, asks the Braisa, well, why not? Mamish like above. Oiklach l'derech zu. Why don't you go in a different direction? Why don't you say that nemru damim lamata b'par shava pamim, and it says damim lamayla b'par, but we don't know how many times. So why don't we compare dam to dam of par to par? Malamata b'par sheva, maybe af lamayla by the par should be sheva. Answers the Braisa, well, you have two options. So nira limidaima. Let's see. Right, what are we focusing on? The lamayla bepad, what is it more comparable to? Done in maila milmaila, makes more sense. By the soyer is one, milmaila. The ain't done in maila mimato. Asks the Braisa, adaraba, done in gufay megufay, wouldn't it be better to learn the dinim of the damapar from damapar? I know it's maila tomato, but it's par. The ain't done in gufay me'alma. So that's why nachamo, the pasuk that says in Tezvav, even though the pasuk explicitly is saying that the soid is like the pod, keilu, the pod is the teacher and the soid is the student, but it's self-understood, it's a two-way street. We fully compare them one to the other. So since there is a detail in the pod that's vague, we learn it from the damasoid for them to be the same. Since it says v'asa as damoy, kasher asa, see the Braisa takes purposefully out the words to the dam hapar, because we're not learning soid from pod. Now we're learning the part from the soid. She'ain Talmud Leimer, the whole clause is not needed. Kasher asa, matam alemi kasher asa, sheyu kol asi yosef shavos, which means kishem shalamata b'par sheva, kach lamata b'soir shev. As we had before in the first part of the Braisa, and now for the latter part of the Braisa, ucheshem shalamayla b'soir achas, kach lamayla b'par is achas, and that's it. Weiter. Then we learned in the Mishnah that when the Kohen Gadol did the sprinkling, and now we're even going back to the Kodesh HaKodshim, and when he sprinkled it against the paroiches, he would count. And as we said, achas, just remember, achas is the achas lamayla, achas. And then when he did the sheva lamato, he didn't say achas time sholosh, achas va'achas, achas v'sholosh. So says the Gemara, I want you to know that there is a machloikas tanoim, how he counted by the sheva lamato. According to all of the Tanoim, you link the Lamaila to the Lamato. The question is on the Seder. Do you say it the way it's written in our Mishnah? Achas v'achas, achas v'shtayim, achas v'sholosh, or do you say shtayim v'achas, sholosh v'achas? Ton Rabbanan, achas, achas v'achas, achas v'shtayim, achas v'sholosh, achas v'arba, achas v'chomesh, achas v'sheish, achas v'sheva, as we had in our Mishnah, and as we have the version here, these are the words of Rebbe Meir. Or in the Mesoides Hashas, he brings from the Yalkut that it's punkt fakir. These are the words of Rebbe Yehuda. But let's keep on just not get confused. Let's read it the way it's written by us. However, Rebbe Yehuda Oimer, no. Yes, that you always link the Lamaila with the Lamata. When you do the Lamaila, it's achas. When you do the first one, Lamata, achas v'achas, but you don't know which one is which. But let's keep on going. When you do the second one, you say shtayim v'achas, sholosh v'achas, arba v'achas, chomesh v'achas, sheish v'achas, and sheva v'achas. Machloikis, which one is mentioned first? Is the Lamaila mentioned first, or is the Lamaila mentioned last? Says the Gemara, v'loi pligi. V'loi pligi means that according to both opinions, both ways are okay. It's really about what is the better way of counting. But even according to one Tana, if the Kohen Gadol would have counted the opposite way, it would have been good. Elama, marki yasrei or marki yasrei. The pshat of the Gemara, as Rashi says 17 lines before the bottom of the Amid, is that in certain locations, he gives an example when people count 21, 22. So now we're quoting English, right? 21. You mentioned the larger number first and then the smaller number second. In other areas, when they would count, they would say 120. 21 in Yiddish, 22. You would mention the smaller number first. Now, just for the sake of clarity, not to be confused, when you hear the words like in our Mishnah, achas ushtayim, achas is not the smaller number. Achas is the bigger number. But you're going to get confused on Ashi. Because achas is the lamaila. let's go to this whole discussion of the Hishtalshalus Ba'or Yashar. You begin with Lamaila and then you come to the Lamata. Or is it really the M is that it's Lamata Lamaila? B'min Nimlach. That the world was created from Sion. Then you mentioned the more detailed first, which is the Lamata. That's really the Machloikas. Like, how do you perceive reality? You're living in the Or Yashar, you're living in the Or Chayz. And really, that makes all the Machloikas between who said what a lot more significant, because you have all of these phenomenal insights. I heard someone put together a sefer from the Torah of the Rebbe regarding all of these Machloikas and Tanoim Amoraim, that the Rebbe gave so many very important insights into the premise, which will explain maybe all of their arguments. What's Rav Meir? Rav Meir was on a much higher level. Fakertis Chaverim were not yored l'tsoiv datoi. Right, Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Eloi was the Rosh Hamadabrim. Let me see, connected more with the relative to the periphery, to the Chitzonius, relative to the Shita of Rabbi Meir. Mamish connected to this Machloikas. Okay, so now the Gemara says the Kula Alma Mias Hazo Rishoina Tzricha Minyan Im Kolachas Ve'achas. You have to link the Lamaila with the Lamata. The only question is it B'derech Lamaila Lamata, Lamata Lamaila? Why do you have to link it at all? So Rabbi Lazar gives us a logic. Again, we're learning Gemara. What's the logic? Shaloyita Bahazois. Not to err when you're counting. And like Rashi says over here, that if you have to verbally count and you make the number more prolonged by adding the achas with all of the details, so then you're going to have more time in between each sprinkling. And that little pause, because you have to verbalize, will help you not make a mistake, because Taka, the Kohen Gadol is by himself. He might skip a number. He might go from 3 to 5. I don't know. So when the counting and with the details, which means it takes him more time, gave him more mental space to concentrate, not to skip a number or not to repeat a number. It can go both ways, not to make a mistake. However, Rabbi Yechanan gives no reason. He says this is not a logic. He said based on a pasuk, and the pasuk we just quoted, the pasuk Tezayin, Perek Tezayin pasuk Yudalad. This is regarding the sprinkling of the dam of the pod. And when it says Velifnei hakapoides yaza, we're not focusing on the Sheva Pa'amim. But if you look inside pasuk Yudalid, the pasuk already begins Vehiza be'etzboi al panei hakapoides kedma. The Torah says the word Hiza. So when it says Sheva Pa'amim, you didn't have to write the words Yaza. Yaza is mamash extra. Oh, so when it says Yaza, she'ein tamaloi Yaza or ma tamaloi Yaza, because it says Hiza regarding the al panei hakapoides. Hiza. It says Yazeh for the Lamato, right? The Sheva Pa'amim, that they're both connected. You have to do the Torah links them. You have to verbally count the Lamaila together with the Lamata, one way or the other, one direction or the other. And the nafkamina between Abba Elazar and Rabbi Yechanan is huge, and that is Ikebenai Delaimana. If he didn't count, but he didn't make a mistake, if he made a mistake, he has to do the avoid again. But if he didn't make a mistake, according to Rabbi Elazar, and this is so to say, whether it's a biblical or whether it's a rabbinic, so to say, geder, to make sure you don't make, if you didn't, so you didn't make a mistake, you're good to go. According to Rabbi Yechanan, God is telling you to do so. And therefore, if you didn't count, you have to do it again. Wow.
Just a side note, was the Kohen Gadol re-dipping his finger inside the dam?
Yes, he needed to do it every time. Yes, Rabbi Chaim. We'll speak about that more. Now, Yotza, we're going back to the Mishnah. He now, right, he did the avodah of the par. He didn't even shech the soir yet. Yotza v'hinichoi, and he put the dam of the par al kan hazov shebehechel. Now, really, it should say v'chulei, because the Gemara is going to be focusing on now he went out. He shechted the dam hasoir. First, they brought the soir to him. To him, as we explained, they bring the soir to Bein Ha'olam LaMizbeach. He shechts the soir. He goes into the Holy of Holies and he does the same avodah with the soir. Now he goes out. Now he has to continue with the avodah of the dam in the Heichel, towards or on the Paroiches. That's another machlekes. But here again, the par comes before the soir. So he has in his hand the dam hasoir and he has to switch it. So the Chachamim say he puts down the dam hasoir because there was another stand, and he picks up the dam hapar, and that is what Rabbi Yehuda says. No, there was only one kan. Ubemela, he couldn't put down the soir You can't do that. You don't have where to put it. The Mizrakim had pointy bottoms. You need it.
Rabbi,
yes.
how is it possible that the blood wouldn't get congealed if it was sitting there? If the Dama power was sitting there the whole time, he's got to shech the soil and go in and go out. I mean, we learned before that you have to have a kohen steering it the whole time.
Maybe Bruce, we can unmute Bruce over here. There's a noise in the background. If you can do that, ask to unmute. How long does it take for blood to congeal? I'm curious. That's a good question. I know human blood, animal blood might be different.
I'd say if it were less than a minute in small amounts.
But if it's a large amount,
small amounts,
but a bull,
under no pressure. So if it comes from an artery, it takes longer. Must be 10 minutes. But if it's just vein blood, then it's less than a minute.
So Baruch, does it make sense to you by natural laws that if you have all of the blood of a bull, this is a large amount of blood for 10 minutes, it can stay without getting congealed?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, weiter.
Yes.
Okay, so Tanan Hassam, now we're going to focus on this machlokes, and we're going to have the initial suggestion as to what's wrong with two stands, one approach and another approach. This is mama's beautiful, how we compare dinim. Now we are familiar with it for those of us who learn shkalim, because if you remember, we learned about, don't confuse the 15 offices with the 13 shofars. There were 13. A shofar is just a name that we give in the Mishnah for a pushka that has a narrow top like a shofar. If you flip it upside down, this is just to prevent people from putting their hands in and instead of giving, taking, God forbid. So, you had this today in our pushkas, we just have we have a narrow opening, same concept. So you can put in, but you can't easily take out. So what were the 13 shofars? So 2 of them was to place money for people who wanted to bring bird karbanis. Now, it doesn't mean that you needed to place it in the shofar. It means is that if I would like to place my money there, and I know that I can rely that the kohanim will not bring the afternoon tamid until they empty out all of the money donated for the bird karbanis, and we can rely on the kohanim. So that was an option. So you can put the money in there, and you know that by the end of the day, you got your kapara. Now, we have generally 2 types of bird karbanis. Donation karbanos, and even if you bring a pair, both of them is an oila, that's a donation carbon, versus the few people that have to bring obligatory bird karbanos, whenever that is. Sometimes it's only if you're not wealthy, sometimes it's lechatchila, you bring 2 bird karbanos, 1 chatos, 1 oila. Another important detail, that whoever put money in these shofars, they would not just deposit coins, because it's very important that when the kohen removes the coins, he removes the coins from that specific owner. So the money that was needed for the birds were bundled in some sort of bag or bundle. So one was separated from the other. Now the kohen did not know which bundle belongs to which person, but he didn't need to know, because all he needed to intend is that whoever is the owner of these coins and therefore of these karbanis, I'm bringing the carbon for him or for her. That's 100% okay. As we learned in Zvachim, that a machsheva stam is good. If you have in mind the wrong owners, then you mess it up. You have in mind stam. Now, another detail, the final detail, is that there are only 2 bird types. They're from the same general family, but there are only 2 bird types that can be offered when you bring a bird carbon. One bird type is called toirim, b'lashon abim, or a toir, taf reish mitacholam. That means a turtle dove in English. And the other one is called b'nei yoina, a young pigeon, a young dove. And with all the details that the toir has to be mature, with the becoming gilded or yellow, and the b'nei yoina is before it becomes gilded, b'chule. So the Mishnah says over there that there were 2 boxes. On one box it said kinim, which is the plural of kan or kane, which means a pair of birds. On the other box, it said b'nei yoina. So the Chachamim understand that one box, the kinim, guys remember, was for choiva. Whoever needed, was mechuyev to bring bird karbanos. Again, they can buy the birds and give it to the kohen. But if they didn't want to stay there the whole time, they could have placed their money in the box that was for kinim. And people that wanted to bring a donation bird pair, they would put it in the box called b'nei yoina. So holds the Chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda said, absolutely not. If you are obligated to bring a pair of birds, you had no shofar for you. You needed to give it to a kohen. There were 2 boxes, there were 2 shofars. They were both for donation birds. Why do you need to have 2 boxes? Oh, because since you had an option to bring either toirim or b'nei yoina, and they had a different value, So if I'm leaving the money which was enough to buy only the Bnei Yoina, they were cheaper because they were younger, if that's or the opposite. So then you have to have separate boxes. That's what we're going to take off. Tanach, some 3 lines from the bottom. That Rabbi Yehuda Omer, disagreeing with the sages. The sages hold that kinim chayva. Bnei Yoina nedava no lo yhayu shayfaris likinei chayva. But he explained why. Not because you need to have 2 different boxes because each value was different, which is an issue, which has to be explained. But the words of Rabbi Yehuda is because if you would have a box for chayves, oy geval taroives, there's going to be an intermixing. Now, he didn't explain what it means, and we're going to have to identify what is the issue. That will be the connection. So now, says the Gemara, let's understand shkolim, and then we'll link it to our Rabbi Yehuda here that did not allow to have 2 stands. What's the meaning over there? Mepnei taroives. So here, take number 1, Rabbi Yosef, the great Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef, I'll tell you what it means. It means mepnei ta'aroives chayva b'nedavam. Oh, if you're gonna have both boxes are both for nedava, nedavas are only oilers. I'm not talking about the money issue. That has to be explained. But no matter if you know everything is a donation, the nekuda here is everything is going to be brought for an oiler. That's good. But if you have 2 boxes and one is l'chayvim, one is for nedava, and let's now presume that's the whole Rabbi Yehuda that even though each one is written, you write on the box what it is, but when we don't trust, Kahana might not read what it says. Writing is not enough of a guarantee that you're not going to confuse. So here he might remove the money from the box that was designated for chayva. He will think he removed it for nedava, which means he's going to offer both these birds with the avoida of a bird oila, that it's done lamaila, by the birds lamaila, not lamata, that none of it is eaten, all of it is burnt, completely not bringing a carbon chayva. So to prevent from happening, they both have to be at least nedavas. So at least you won't make that confusion. Now to that, Amalei Abaye, when he heard that from Rabbi Yosef, he asked him, I don't understand. You are afraid that a kohen will accidentally take money from a box that really was for chayva and offer them both as nedava, but the navitre make 2 boxes, meaning one for chayva and one for nedava. The nichtav alayu hay lo chayva hay v'nedava. So don't write kinim and bnei yoina. Write clearly, like the chachamim hold that kinim was l'chayva. Write it. That was the whole point of Rabbi Yosef. Is a raya that what says the Gemara? This is beautiful. Rabbi Yehuda Dafnei Amud Beis Leis Lake Sivam. He doesn't consider that just because you're going to write chayva on top of the kinim, or just that is sufficient for you to be safeguarded for the kohen not to make that confusion. The kohen won't read it.
According to that, you can't have any other shapers.
Oh, 1 second. We're going to get to there, Rabbi Chaim. He's going to be refuted. But it's just beautiful to see the link. And Abaye, right, I'm sorry, the Gemara is proving this point to respond to Abaye from our Mishnah. Now, at least you see the link. Because the Tanach, look in our Mishnah, it says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo yisham elokan echad bilvad. And why is that? So the presumption is because according to the Chachamim, like we mentioned, when you have 2 stands, you would first put down whichever blood you're holding, and then you would lift up the new blood that you're going to use. And I'm saying that dafka because, as you remember, any step of the avodah has to be done in the right hand. Now, true, we learned that which is only considered a preliminary, like walking into the kodesh kachim, clearly he held it with the left hand, the ketores. But whenever, even by preliminaries, if you can use your right hand, use your right hand. The advantage of first putting down the old blood will be that when you're picking up now the dam that you're going to be using for the next step, you can pick it up with your right hand. You can mamish use the whole time your right hand. You put down the old with your right hand, you pick up the new with your right hand. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you don't have such an option because there's only 1 stand. So I don't care. It's left is going to be used. Whichever one is holding the old cup, the other hand is going to have to be used to pick up the new cup. And why wouldn't he also make 2 stands? The answer must be because if there's 2 stands, like we said, you put it down first. Now you have 2 bowls in front of you. You, God forbid, can mistake one for the other. Now, obviously, this is going to be challenged. There's different amounts of blood. The color of the blood looks different. We'll get to that. But because he has to pick up now the dam hapar, he might pick up the dam hasoir. He has to pick up the dam hasoir, he might pick up the dam hapar. But the question is, so right, understand, par soir. It must be that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't feel that writing is enough of a safeguard. Great. So the Rabbi Yehuda l'shitasoi, that is all the approach of Rabbi Yosef, says the Gemara. Oh, and today, my tamaloi, mishum de machalfi, you might confuse and take the, one and v'navet today v'lichtav alay high part I saw it. Hello, that's the raya that Rabbi Yehuda lace like siva. What the Gemara is going to do now, before we come back to our Mishnah, right, is refute the solshita of Rabbi Yosef. That when Rabbi Yosef interpreted that the reason why there wasn't a shofar for chayva, taroivus means you might confuse the chayva bin adava, and that the Gemara says meisvei, and we're quoting a Mishnah in Shkola. Shalosh esrei shofaros haya b'migdash or shofaros. There were 13 of these chests, pushkas. V'haya kasuv aleihen tiklin chadatin. Remember the new Shkola, the tiklin atikin. If you remember, because not only is there a surplus every year, hopefully, but most importantly, if a Jew did not bring the shekel of Tafshin Pei, he can bring it on Tafshin Pei Aleph. And not that it's used for this year's avodah, it's joined with the surplus of last year. And we're going through all the 13, and the kinin, and the goizlei oila, and the box for the eitzim, and the box for the lavoina, and the box for the zav lakapoides, and then the 6 linadava. Now let's go by this over, quoting the Mishnah. Tiklin chadatin elu shkalim shur kol shana v'shana. Tiklin atikin mishul l'shakal l'shtaked. You didn't bring it last year, do you? Yishkol l'shana habal. It's almost worded in the opposite. In other words, it means that bring it now, but it's going to be joined with the old shkalim. And there was a surplus. They already had that fund. Kinin hein toiden. Gois le'yoyla hein b'nei yoyla. V'kulan oylois divrei Rebbe Yehuda. And the point is, what's the eye over here? Now, for animals had no boxes. Just to know something else, why didn't they make a box for animals? Because you have to do smicha, and even though smicha is not ma'akev, they didn't want for people just to put it in the box and go away and rely on the kahanim. Birds don't eat smicha, so they gave that opportunity. So what's the raya over here? The raya is that such a confusion will not happen. Such a confusion will not happen. Why is that? What's the raya chevra? Help me out over here. Why won't there be a confusion? Maybe because the Mishnah writes for your kosav alein. Maybe because the Mishnah points out that every box had something written on it. Or maybe it's because, like Rabbi Chaim said before, why wouldn't you confuse the tiklin chadatin with the tiklin atikin? You can also confuse that. But they were not afraid that they would confuse it. There's no fear of confusion. And therefore, the Gemara says that no, the whole confusion has nothing to do with them not reading, with that writing is not enough of a safeguard. We're going to have to then explain our Mishnah, but just at least to open up the new understanding when going back to Shkolim, ki aser avdimi, Amar, he says, he always came with information that, you know how they typed it in Eretz Yisrael, Amri b'marava, that gzeirosh mishum chatos shemesu be'olel. If you're going to have a box that has in it the money for chayva, one of the rules, halacha l'moshe misina by a chatos, which makes chatos different from all the other karbanos, is that if the owner of a chatos passes away, unlike a oila that he or she designated that is brought post-mortem, chatos may not be brought, and not only may it not be brought, you don't even have the option of yidu achi yista'avu and sell it. No, it's left to die. And subsequently, money that's designated for a chatos, the money has to be destroyed by throwing it into the Yam HaMelech, by grinding it up and throwing it into another body of water. So how can you have a box that has l'chayva? Maybe by the time the kohen is going to take out the money, the owner passed away, and that money has to be thrown into the Yam HaMelech. That has nothing to do with writing. That is what Rav Dimi said. I know it's getting late. We'll stop over here, and we're going to clarify that. And just to say a heads up, that Daf Nun Vav is a daf that we have very often. The whole thing, you'll remember it, for those who learned it the last time. The whole concept, the whole big sugya of Bereda, or no Bereda, which is the big Tosfos and retroactive clarification. What is the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda? All of that will be clarified, God willing, to be continued. And what we have to now connect, we're gonna say Taroivis is about maybe, or we know the owner died. And we're going to have to give another insight why Rabbi Yehuda disallows 2 golden stands, only needing to have 1 to be continued.
Will we have time for one more daf tomorrow? Or are we just doing one daf tomorrow?
Well, you know what, like this,
Memorial Day.
first of all, Baruch, that I'm very happy to share that the Olam voted tomorrow to daven at 7, not at 8 for me. It's a thank God. So I'm happy we're learning at least at 6, but you know what? Maybe it's a small daf. It's an easy daf. If we could, I'll put out in the WhatsApp. Maybe we'll start just 10 minutes early and we'll get into daf. We'll get another.
Okay.
Credit.
I don't want to ruin anybody's holiday. Just thought.
No, you're not. You're helping us. It's good, Baruch, because getting a credit doesn't mean we're getting off. We never get off. We're getting a credit and we're going.